if I may briefly introduce myself, I spent 36 years as a family physician, a GP in a rural part of England, and I ended up with a number of very senior leadership roles in the National Health Service, probably culminating with being appointed as chairman of NICE, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, which is a role I held for 6 years. NICE has got two main functions. One is to determine which new drugs and technologies are cost effective enough to be used in the British NHS. But the other is to produce high quality guidelines on best practice in medicine. So NICE looks in very great detail at the evidence, and in partnership with patients and with healthcare experts, it generates what are generally, I think, considered to be world-class, world-leading guidelines. And I do know that guidelines are very often thought of as being very different in a different world to the world of narrative medicine. Now, when I was chairman of NICE, I made a deliberate point of ensuring that in every single lecture or presentation that I gave, I talked about the importance of kindness and compassion. And inevitably, absolutely inevitably, after every single occasion, someone from the audience would come up to me and they'd say they were surprised about my talk and that they really expected me to talk much more about science and evidence-based medicine. And I always responded in the same way by saying, but I did. The simple fact is that the value and the vital importance of compassion is evidence-based. It isn't some soft and cuddly optional extra. It's a key part of best practice. It really matters. And evidence-based medicine is an important concept. Since ancient times and in every society, most clinicians tended to choose the treatments that they offered based on what they believed was the most effective. They believed that cupping or applying leeches or venesection worked. They knew, or they'd been taught, that it had worked, so they continued to do it, safe in the knowledge that it was standard practice. But more likely, they were simply making the same mistakes with ever-increasing confidence. And the term evidence-based medicine really first started to be used in the 1990s. And in 1996, it was defined by Professor David Sackett as, and I quote, the conscientious and judicious use of current best evidence from clinical care research in the management of individual patients. And evidence really, really matters. In my first ever hospital job as a doctor very many years ago, patients who'd suffered heart attacks were kept on strict bed rest for, wait for it, for 3 weeks, and were forbidden from doing so much as walking to the toilet. They even had to suffer the indignity of the bedpan. And one doctor's career span later, everything has changed. Rather than being kept on strict bed rest, heart attack patients now receive urgent hospitalization and intensive treatment with rapid mobilization, because we now know that prolonged immobility is hugely dangerous. So instead of the 3 weeks of bed rest, it's now second-day gym referral, an astonishing change. Research and continuing research has tested every form of treatment and found which ones are beneficial and which ones aren't. However, I still have in my files a heartfelt thank you letter from the family of one heart attack victim who I treated way back in 1972, a very long time ago. And they wrote to me that they were intensely grateful to me and my colleagues for the care that had, their quote, saved his life. And the fact is, we now know he was lucky to have survived the treatment, let alone the heart attack. The bed rest that we'd so confidently insisted on was actually the perfect recipe for a pulmonary embolus, but we didn't know that. And I learned long ago that recovery and gratitude are not necessarily evidence that a treatment was really effective. So practicing with evidence in mind really does matter, but I still think too many people have a poor understanding of evidence-based medicine. They see it as cookbook medicine, in which overly standardized care is offered to patients and is simply based on a hierarchy of evidence and a rigid application of guidelines. And this is just misguided. Professor David Sackett, the father of evidence-based medicine, right at the start stressed that it should involve, and I quote again, the thoughtful identification and compassionate use of individual patients' predicaments, rights, and preferences in making clinical decisions about their care. So compassion isn't an added extra. It's not something you should add on as an optional add-on that can be carried out when you've got time. It's critical and an evidence-based aspect of care. Let's face it, human beings who are ill, who fear themselves to be ill, need compassionate care as much as they need scientifically appropriate care. And every clinician aspires to deliver high-quality care. Clinicians worry if challenging working conditions make this hard to achieve, whether it's through excessive workload or too few staff or poor facilities or insufficient resources. Clinicians want to deliver the very best for their patients, to live up to the aspirations they had when they joined the profession. And modern medicine can be technologically magnificent, and recent advances in pharmaceuticals and diagnostics and genomics offer so much, but without compassion and without kindness, medicine can only deliver part of this. Look back to those early months of the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of the pictures we saw on our TV screens were horrific. The images of patients dying alone with, well, in the UK at least, relatives and loved ones being banned from being with them in their final hours. These broke our hearts. And what was so striking in so many of the emotional news reports was how the focus of care wasn't solely on the intubation, the high-tech monitors, the skillful staff, but on just how powerful and important compassion was in their care. There were so many stories of nurses and other staff sitting with dying patients just so they weren't alone. They were holding their hands, often with gloves on, to demonstrate humanity and caring. Both relatives and staff absolutely recognized the vital importance of these aspects of care and were heartbroken when they couldn't be provided. So as I say, compassion isn't an additional extra, it's central. When you and I are ill, we want to be treated with technical efficiency, with the best possible guidelines being followed, but we also want care and compassion. And as Andreas has said, there are many definitions of compassion, but I think it's a pretty straightforward concept. We certainly know when it's being delivered, when we're patients or when we're relatives, we know when it's being delivered with compassion and when it isn't. It involves demonstrating characteristics like empathy and sensitivity and kindness and warmth. And when these are lacking all too frequently, I think one of the factors that underpins poor care is an attitude to care and treatment that's too based on tasks rather than patients. Task-based care is frequently impersonal. And whilst getting tasks done is obviously important, it shouldn't be totally dominating. But in so many healthcare systems around the world, politicians have prioritized efficiency and getting tasks done to be able to tick off the tasks that have been completed. And in cash-strapped healthcare systems, which is probably all of our systems, efficiency matters. So it's no surprise politicians demand measurable metrics to be reassured the money they invest in the system is getting the right results. And they might think that being patient-centered and caring slows everything down. But there was one interesting study of nurses in Australia that showed how, whilst fast-paced care and getting tasks done seemed to sort of be something that everyone aimed for, it created problems of its own. Because the failure to be person-centered meant so many nurses found their professional values were unmet, leading to moral distress and dissatisfaction. And it's little wonder, and certainly in the UK, we're losing so many nurses and doctors. And this is so often associated with an inability to deliver the sort of care they would like to. There's another great saying, Andreas had lots of quotes. One of my favorite is, happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. And I think this tension between clinician aspirations and the reality of the way that care is so often delivered has a major impact on morale, on workforce retention, and ultimately on the quality of care that can be offered to patients. So we simply have to get the focus back in the right place. And after all, let's never forget, we're all patients too. Thank you very much.